The rain came down in sheets, hammering against the thin wooden roof of the small village shrine. Inside, Akihiro crouched on the cold tatami mat, shivering, not from the chill, but from the weight of what he had done. His hands, calloused from years of training in the quiet discipline of his father's dojo, shook like a leaf in a storm. A week ago, his world had been simple: the steady rhythm of daily life, the comfort of routine, the familiar warmth of family. But that life had ended the moment his younger sister, Yumi, had been struck by a carriage in the bustling streets of Kyoto. She was gone. And with her, a part of Akihiro had died too. For nights, he wandered the empty streets, unable to sleep, unable to find solace in the words of the villagers who murmured, "It is fate," or "It is God's will." He could not forgive himself. He had promised to protect her, and he had failed. One evening, as he sat on the edge of the riverbank, the water reflecting the moonlight in ripples, an old man appeared from the mist. He wore a cloak soaked through with rain, and his eyes, sharp, piercing, yet calm, seemed to look straight into the depths of Akihiro's soul. "You carry a heavy burden," the man said, voice soft yet commanding. "But courage is not born in comfort. It is forged in fire. And there is a path that has existed for 800 years, waiting for the one willing to face their fear, their guilt, and their despair." Akihiro looked up, skepticism twisting his face. "And what path is that?" he asked, though a part of him already feared the answer. "The ritual of the Yamabushi," the old man said. "A journey into the mountains, where only those ready to face death, hunger, and their own weakness may return with unshakable courage. It is not merely a test of strength, but of the heart." Akihiro's first instinct was to turn away. He had no interest in legends or rituals. Yet something deep within him, a fragile, desperate hope, made him listen. Perhaps, if he could endure this, he could find a way to forgive himself. Perhaps he could finally stand again without the weight of failure pressing him into the dirt. By dawn, he had made his decision. Leaving behind his empty home, the remnants of laughter and life that now only existed in memories, he began to climb into the misty peaks of the hidden mountains. The air was thin and biting, the trails slick with mud, yet he pressed forward. Each step was an act of rebellion against the fear that had claimed him, each breath a silent promise to his sister. Days turned into nights, and the mountains tested him relentlessly. Snow fell, blinding and cruel. Wolves' eyes glimmered in the darkness, and the wind seemed to whisper doubts into his ears. But even in the darkest hours, Akihiro remembered the old man's words, "Courage is forged in fire." And he was beginning to understand that fire could be more than physical. It could burn away the fear that had nested in his heart. On the seventh night, as he huddled beneath a jagged rock, Akihiro finally saw it, a circle of ancient stones, overgrown with moss and glowing faintly under the moonlight. This was the shrine where the ritual would begin. As he stepped inside, the silence was deafening. The stones seemed to hum with centuries of whispers, the echoes of countless souls who had walked this path before him. And then he heard the first challenge. A low, resonant voice, neither male nor female, filled the air. "To move forward, you must face what you fear most. Not the mountain. Not the wolves. Not hunger. You must confront the shadow within yourself." Akihiro's knees buckled. The shadow within, he knew it well. It was the face of his sister, smiling at him in the courtyard just before she was struck. It was the sound of her laughter, gone forever. It was the memory of the promise he had broken. And now, the ritual demanded that he confronted head-on, in the silence of this ancient place, alone with nothing but his own trembling heart. The wind picked up, tugging at his soaked clothes, as though the mountain itself wanted to push him away. But Akihiro took a deep breath, feeling the snow cold against his skin, and stepped forward into the circle of stones. The ground beneath him seemed to pulse with life, and suddenly, in the quiet, he heard a whisper, not of the mountain, not of the wind, but of his own heart, "Do not run." For the first time in days he felt a flicker of something he had thought lost forever, hope. But it was fragile, fragile as the thin layer of ice forming beneath his feet. One wrong step, one faltering moment, and it could shatter. Then, as the shadows of the mountains grew long under the rising sun, Akihiro felt it, the first true test of the ritual. The stones before him began to shift, creating walls and passageways, a labyrinth seemingly designed to trap him in his own fears. And from the depths of the stone circle, a cold, whispering voice echoed, "Face the pain. Face the guilt. Or be consumed by it forever." Akihiro's breath caught. Every instinct screamed to flee, to abandon the path and return to the comfort of the life he had lost. Yet he did not move. His hands tightened into fists, his eyes red and raw, fixed on the path ahead. He was no longer just a grieving brother. He was a man stepping into the fire of a ritual that had shaped warriors, monks, and souls for 8 centuries. And in that instant, as the wind howled and the shadows twisted like living things, Akihiro understood something profound. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to step forward, even when the fear threatened to swallow him whole. Then, just as he took the first step into the shifting stones, a sudden roar split the air, a sound that was neither entirely human nor entirely animal. It echoed through the mountains, deep and terrifying. Akihiro froze, his heart hammering like a drum, his mind screaming to turn back. And in that silence, that fragile instant between fear and resolve, he realized the ritual had begun in earnest, and he was about to face a test unlike anything he had ever imagined. The roar had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving Akihiro alone with the deafening silence of the mountains. His heart still pounded, each beat echoing in his ears like a war drum. The labyrinth of stone shifted silently before him, twisting corridors and passages that seemed to grow taller, tighter, and more suffocating with every step. Each step forward was a battle against not only the mountain's chill, but the storm raging inside him. The first trial came quickly. A narrow bridge, carved from a single slab of stone, spanned a jagged chasm that yawned like a maw beneath him. Wind tore at his clothes, icy and unforgiving, and the abyss below seemed to whisper doubts into his mind. "You are not enough. You cannot protect anyone. You failed Yumi." Akihiro's hands gripped the edge of the bridge, knuckles white, and he closed his eyes. The memory of Yumi flashed before him, her small hand clutching his, her voice calling for him, and the screech of wheels that had shattered everything. His throat tightened, and a strangled sob threatened to escape. But then, deep in the core of his chest, something shifted. A quiet, fierce whisper, not from the mountain, not from the stones, but from within, said, "Keep walking. One step at a time." He opened his eyes and began to move, foot by foot, heart racing, each step a defiance against the fear that had haunted him for weeks. Halfway across, the bridge began to tremble, small cracks snaking across the stone. The wind grew louder, almost alive, howling in rage and testing his resolve. Akihiro froze, caught between the desire to flee and the knowledge that retreat would mean surrendering to the darkness inside him. Then he remembered Yumi's laughter, the way it had always brought warmth to the coldest of days. And with that memory, he forced his legs forward. One step. Then another. By the time he reached the other side, his body was drenched, shaking, but he had taken the first real act of courage in the ritual, choosing to move forward despite fear. The labyrinth shifted again, opening into a dense forest that seemed alive, every tree gnarled and twisted as if it were observing him. The shadows grew long and distorted, stretching across the ground like tendrils of doubt. Akihiro knew the forest held more than physical obstacles. It was a place where the ritual confronted the deepest corners of the soul. He walked cautiously, each crunch of snow and fallen leaves sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a mirror image of himself. Same age, same eyes, same trembling hands. But the reflection smiled, cruel and mocking. "You cannot do this," the reflection said, voice identical yet distorted, like echoes in a hollow cave. "You are weak. You failed her. You will fail again." Akihiro felt a cold sweat run down his back. Every word hit like a dagger. He wanted to turn, to run into the safety of the unknown forest, away from the truth reflected back at him. But the reflection stepped closer, circling him, mocking his grief and guilt with every movement. "I loved her," Akihiro whispered, voice barely audible. I failed her." The reflection's smile widened. Yes. You failed. And now you are nothing. Akihiro's fist clenched. Pain, rage, grief, it all collided in his chest, threatening to crush him. But then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his head. He looked into the eyes of the reflection, saw the raw, human suffering mirrored back at him, and understood something the ritual had been teaching all along. Courage was not the absence of fear, guilt, or pain. Courage was the act of facing those shadows, not running from them. With trembling hands, he stepped forward and touched the reflection. The coldness that met his skin was shocking, almost unbearable. The figure froze, then began to dissolve into mist, leaving only Akihiro standing alone, heart hammering, breath ragged, but alive in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. The forest thinned, giving way to a cliff overlooking a valley bathed in mist. Below, waterfalls thundered into jagged rocks, sending spray high into the air. The path forward led to a narrow ledge slick with ice. To cross it meant leaning into fear itself, trusting balance and instinct over certainty. Akihiro swallowed. The wind tore at his face, threatening to unseat him, but he took a deep breath and stepped onto the ledge. Every step was a battle: ice, wind, gravity, fear. He thought of Yumi again, and how she had trusted him with her life in the simplest, most profound way. He thought of all the times he had doubted himself, and he chose to honor her memory not through despair, but through action. Step by step, heart racing, he crossed by the time he reached solid ground. Night had fallen. He collapsed onto the earth, exhausted, shivering, tears freezing on his cheeks. But beneath the physical exhaustion, a subtle, powerful shift had occurred. He was no longer the man who had wandered the streets in guilt and despair. The ritual was working, burning away the weakness and replacing it with something raw, elemental, and unbreakable. Yet the greatest trial had not yet come. In the distance, atop a jagged peak, he saw a faint light flicker, small, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably alive. He knew instinctively that was the final stage of the ritual, the confrontation that would test everything he had endured. His body ached, his spirit trembled, but he rose as he climbed toward the light. The wind howled like the cries of the lost, and the night seemed endless. And then, at the summit, the final challenge revealed itself, a figure draped in white, face hidden, holding a sword that glimmered under the moonlight. A whisper reached him. To claim courage, you must face the choice between life and death, between surrender and the unknown. Akihiro's heart froze. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the culmination of 800 years of tradition. And yet fear surged through him stronger than ever. One wrong move, and everything, the ritual, his hope, his chance at redemption, would vanish. He took a step forward, the sword's reflection shimmering across his face, and in that instant, he realized the truth of the ritual. Courage was not a gift given. It was a burden accepted, a fire endured. And Akihiro was ready to face it, but the figure raised the sword, and the mountain fell silent in anticipation. Akihiro's legs shook as he stood before the figure in white, the sword gleaming in the pale moonlight. Every muscle in his body ached, every breath burned, yet he felt a calmness he had never known, a stillness forged through exhaustion, fear, and relentless trial. 800 years of ritual had brought him here, to this peak, to this moment where courage would either be claimed or forever denied. The figure did not speak. It simply waited, motionless, a mirror of inevitability. Akihiro knew the ritual was not merely a test of skill, but a test of the soul, the final confrontation with his deepest self, the culmination of every fear, every failure, every tear shed in the lonely nights of the mountains. He remembered Yumi. Her laughter, her tiny hand clasped in his, the moment before tragedy stole her away. He had carried her memory like a wound, raw and unhealing, but now he realized something profound. Courage was not meant to erase grief. It was meant to allow one to move through it, to honor it, and to act despite it. With a slow, deliberate breath, Akihiro stepped forward. The sword moved first, slicing the air with a hiss that carried across the mountaintop. Heart pounding, he felt a rush of fear, sharp and hot, threatening to make him falter. But instead of fleeing, he did something unexpected. He met the blade, not with his own weapon, but with his presence, his resolve, his entire being. The sword came closer, yet Akihiro did not flinch. Memories flashed. Yumi's small smile, the night walks along the river, the sound of the rain against the rooftops. He let those memories fill him, not as chains to guilt, but as fuel to stand. And then, in a moment that felt both eternal and fleeting, the figure lowered the sword. The white cloak dissolved into mist, drifting away into the night, leaving Akihiro standing alone on the peak. Silence enveloped him, heavy and profound, yet within it, he felt a heartbeat, a rhythm of courage, steady and unwavering. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe freely. Not a shallow gasp, not a trembling shiver, but a deep, grounded inhale, filling his lungs with the mountain air, the snow, the mist. He had faced his shadow. He had stared into the abyss of his own guilt, fear, and despair. And he had not turned away. Hours passed. The first light of dawn began to color the sky, brushing the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Akihiro looked out over the valleys below, the rivers winding like silver threads through the land, the forests stretching endlessly into the horizon. The world seemed unchanged, yet he knew he was different. He had been transformed not by glory, not by conquest, but by the quiet, relentless act of choosing to endure. The descent was slower, thoughtful, meditative. Each step felt like a pledge, to himself, to Yumi, to the life he had almost abandoned. The mountains no longer seemed menacing. The wind no longer whispered doubts, but carried a steady, calm affirmation: you are here. You endure. You move forward. When Akihiro finally returned to the village, his clothes torn and stained, his hair matted, his hands roughened and scarred, the villagers did not recognize him at first. They saw a man who had walked through storms, mountains, and fear itself, and who had returned with something invisible yet palpable: presence, strength, a quiet command of life. He did not speak immediately of the ritual. Words could never capture the fire he had endured, the silent battles fought in the shadows of the mountains. But slowly, through gestures, small acts of kindness, moments of calm decisiveness, the villagers saw it, a courage that was no longer born of bravado or anger, but of understanding, resilience, and the profound knowledge that life's most difficult moments were not meant to break us. They were meant to teach us who we truly are. And Akihiro understood something that could never be undone. Courage was not a shield against pain, nor a cloak against fear. It was the choice to stand, even when the world threatened to pull you under. It was the act of moving forward, step by step, through the unknown, through the darkness, through loss and sorrow. Years later, when the villagers spoke of the Yamabushi ritual, they whispered of Akihiro, not as a legend, but as proof. Proof that courage could be cultivated, nurtured, and forged through relentless trial. And for those willing to walk the mountains, to face the shadows within themselves, the ritual remained, 800 years old, timeless, unyielding. Akihiro never forgot Yumi, nor the weight of failure he once carried. But the mountains had taught him that grief and courage could coexist. That fear could be faced, not erased. And that the heart, even when broken, could rise stronger than it had ever been. In the quiet moments, when the snow fell gently outside his window and the wind sang softly through the trees, Akihiro would close his eyes and remember the peak, the shifting stones, the figure in white, and the moment he chose to endure. And every time, he would smile, not for the absence of fear, but for the unshakable courage that had grown from it, eternal, silent, and unyielding. For courage, true courage, was never a gift. It was a path walked alone, step by step, shadow by shadow, until the heart could finally stand, unbroken, unafraid, and free. And in that freedom, Akihiro understood life itself, not as something to be controlled, but as something to be embraced, with courage, with love, and with an unwavering spirit.